Let's dive in.
Yeah. So, let me start the backup. Right.
Starting
Okay.
again.
So there's the elephant in the room is this is podcast number 2 for the week. So yesterday we spent an hour and a half in the club in town. It was probably the best podcast I think that's ever been recorded.
Yep.
And I think
Of all podcasts,
of all podcasts
ever made, not just ours.
Exactly, covered it all, solved all the problems, and then we played it after. We said, we'll just check the file before we submit it to Spotify. Before we listened to it, and it was like, I don't know, 2 drunk, high-pitched robots. You literally couldn't tell what we were saying.
Full gremlin mode.
Yeah. So the artifact I think we had on the last call, it was the whole thing was that. That was disappointing. Felt a little bit flat. You considered trying to rush one out yesterday to make sure we hit the usual Wednesday, but I think it would have been crap and a bit stilted, and like we would have just tried to
replicate
what we did and done it badly, and like luckily I've forgotten everything.
Exactly.
Like, despite the fact it was like it's a Tenacious D song. It's like this can be a tribute.
Yeah.
This isn't the best podcast, but it's a tribute to the best podcast.
I love that. That's very good.
Maybe we should call that. Maybe that's the show title instead.
The new show title. Yeah.
Yeah, we did have a show title yesterday that we arrived at, which maybe we'll talk about. But
I mean, for context, I think like we don't really prepare too much for these episodes, other than we'll have a broad think about like what the theme of the episode's going to be about. I think roughly we'll try to stick to the same theme, but we'll probably cover it in a different way.
Yeah.
Because it's not prepared at all. So the theme this week was obviously based off of listening to conversation on the All In podcast on the weekend, and maybe like a lot of the discourse around AI lately has been predominantly kind of doomerist for the most part. And I guess what we wanted to achieve with this week's pod was to kind of explore perhaps what the net positive tracks might look like from AI. And I guess like the caveat here, which I guess we uncovered yesterday, is you kind of do need to explore the doomer paths a little bit in order to kind of game theory out how this might play. And then you arrive at like what the positives are going to be and who it benefits and how you can take advantage of what's coming. So yeah, I think that's going to be the objective. Again, how we kind of navigate it, we'll leave that up to the next hour and a bit. We'll figure it out. Yeah,
well, at least we have two devices going right now for recording, so
that's
hopefully
the lesson. Yeah.
Worst case you get a slightly shitty recording.
But it's happened to everyone, right? Like I remember years ago listening to Tim Ferriss. I think he talks about like losing an episode as well, where like his recording equipment failed, and you know, he's obviously doing like really long form with guests as well, so that must have been.
And with people that don't want to waste their time.
Exactly.
Like, for us to talk again it's just.
Well, we're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so it's actually not a big deal, and we'll probably find other things to talk about anyway. So.
I gotta admit, I felt a bit flat afterwards.
Yeah, it's
like,
natural. Right? Yeah.
God, that's like literally in the podcast, I was looking at my phone and thinking, you know what, I should probably use that as a backup recorder just in case. And I was thinking of that. Like Tim Ferriss, like talking about having like several backups and battery backups and stuff, and I was like, yeah, no, maybe we leave it up to the winds of fate. If it's recorded, it's recorded.
That's
then
it.
We share it. If it's not, it's
Yep.
not. We just do another one. But that's Hang on. Welcome to good stuff. There you go. Okay, now we can talk.
Get that out of the way, because we often miss that, don't we? We get like 8-10 minutes in and then just keep going. I think because we had good momentum from last week's episode as well. But we actually have a bunch of new followers as well on YouTube. Yep, some criticism, which was constructive. That's good. There's still a couple of shout outs we should do. Do you want to do those, Pete?
Sorry, that's the thing, you forget about these things, don't you? Right. So first of all, shout out to Sean,
yes,
who was the first person to send us Satoshis on Fountain app. So if anybody is curious what that means, like podcasting 2.0 is a protocol by which you can then send Bitcoin as money to various people. We've got an account on Fountain, which means if you listen on there, you can stream us money. Like when you listen, Sean was the first person. So thank you very much, Sean. So shout out, Sean. And then the second person will be shout out to Crispy, who was our biggest donor of the week so far. What's going on there? Yeah. That's annoying. All right.
Well, our backup audio is going to be in two parts.
Just fucked up, so I don't know what was going on there. Let's just stop it talking to stuff. Like I don't.
There we go.
Let's turn everything off.
It's
just
a
be a voice
progress.
recorder. Bloody hell.
We're learning all of the lessons this week about content creation. It's good.
I think this is a great, it's just a great proof point that we're not trying is the wrong word. That we're not editing anything. So if you wanted, but anyway, shout out Crispy.
Yes.
Who was our biggest donor of the week. So he did ask in his donation, is he the first one? Like, no, you weren't. But you can be the biggest one. Although, I don't know if someone's gonna pop you to the post this week. So usually it's best to just do an exponentially increasing donation week after week, just to make sure. I'd say.
Maybe we need a little leaderboard. Pop a leaderboard on the good stuff.
Yeah.
And we can track this stuff.
But,
all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Thank you. I guess we also had we did have some feedback. We talked about this.
Yeah, we did.
Yesterday. Maybe we cover it quickly here. Was just Transform told us that we should be using videos.
Yeah.
And I thought, you know what? People are always like down on YouTube comments and say you shouldn't read the comments. It's just full of trolls. I was like, you know what? No, I'll just give like a nice, measured response to this guy, and I reckon he'll understand it. And I said, no, the reason we don't use video is like, internet anonymity. I think is something that we should fight for, and I believe in that, and I believe in privacy. Like it's pretty not the driving force to why we have this like little Monkey Island style animation. That was more that we were aware that we kind of needed video of some form, but we didn't want to overcomplicate what we were doing, and we wanted to really focus on having a natural conversation. And what we found was whenever we like set up a camera and pointed at ourselves, and we've done this, like we've done podcasts together on camera, we've done podcasts that we did like effectively the early precursors of this podcast that never went anywhere, because we looked at them afterwards and we just went, this is just it just doesn't work, and it felt like the conversation was stilted, like we just didn't
into
have a natural
interview mode a little bit as well, which I think was more just the setting. It feels a little bit more like you feel a bit more straitjacketed, and you've got to ask each other questions, and it just never felt like what we were trying to replicate essentially are these conversations we have down at the beach every week over coffee anyway. And so they're like fireside chats, but what a fireside chat is meant to be, not the fireside chat that everyone seems to want to host, which is basically just the interview format. And
we even tried, right? The first one we actually did fire a camera out the back of the van looking at the sea.
Yeah.
And we thought, all right, well, people can just watch the ocean like that we're looking at, like as this goes on, and that'll work. But then it turns out like a bunch of like kids would walk past, or there'd be like somebody like getting changed, or like pretty scantily clad in front of you, and you're like, okay, well, you can't just put all this stuff out on the internet. It's like that's not cool. So like we couldn't really use that video. So then we said, all right, well, let's just generate something.
And now
we quite like the aesthetic, right?
Yeah, it's a cool aesthetic, but also like probably my first coding project that I started and finished,
Yeah.
Which I guess we'll get into some of this stuff today, but that was kind of cool. It was kind of fun to build out as well. So
all right, well, there you go. That sounds like, let's get into it. That sounds like a positive.
Yeah.
A positive thing has come out of AI, like you've learned to code. Like, too late, apparently.
Yes. My sense of timing was completely off. Apparently, you could have just skipped this. But, I mean, I wouldn't say I've learned to code. I think that's maybe pushing it a little bit too far. I'm learning to code. But I guess the context here is that I've attempted to learn to code many times over the last decade. And I've always kind of run into blockers where I just kind of crash out.
Yeah.
And I think it's largely a case of, we've discussed this on prior episodes, but largely a case of syntax where, you've got to navigate the language that you're trying to learn. For me, it was always Python, just starting there. And I don't know, it just didn't really necessarily suit my learning style either. And so I just would hit points where I would rely on discipline to keep going, but then that discipline would fail at some point because I was trying to learn in the abstract and I wasn't actually trying to build something. And I think what's really great about using AI now is that you can start with a project and you can just try to build something and you can learn along the way. And that's obviously not how everyone is using AI, right? I mean, I think this whole vibe coding movement exists, and that's kind of not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to be a little bit more proactive with the projects that I'm building, and using Cursor as a kind of a tutor, mentor, and technical co-founder as well off to the side. And I guess, yeah, maybe I can like walk through how I'm doing this a little bit, but vibe coding, I think, is like, when I think about vibe coding, we're essentially just using the agent inside an IDE like Cursor to just, you give it an idea of what you want to build, and then it will just go off and figure out how to build it and what it should be and how it functions. You don't really pay any attention.
You don't look at the code.
Yeah.
You
don't really worry too much about what it does. And I do think that is fraught with any number of risks and dangers. And it's maybe like an outside-in approach to building a product, where you've got, you just start with the goal and you let it go off and do its own thing. And I guess like I'm trying to do this a little bit differently because my objective is twofold. It's one, I just want to build variations of stuff that I've had living in my head, or just ideas that pop into my head on a daily basis. So it's kind of perfect for someone like me. And then the other side is like practically using that as a means to learn what's actually happening under the hood. And that requires a bit of discipline. And so I feel like that's enough for me. Like some things I'll start, with no intention of ever going live. I'll just start it, and it's the process of having something to build that I can just use as a way to educate myself. And so I think that's more of an inside-out approach, maybe, if I were to try to distinguish the two a little bit. It's like not strictly vibe coding. I'm not writing the code, but there's a decision that I'm making to actually review it and try to understand why that code exists. And then I'll switch to, like in Cursor, I'll switch to ask, and I will then just ask, why have you structured the code in this way? Why does this file exist? Like, what is the objective? Could this be cleaned up? Sometimes I'll just go and ask it to review the code, and I'll tell it, like, this was written by a junior developer. Just give me a full review of the code that's been written and any kind of critiques, how you'd improve it, and then it will give me a bunch of suggestions, and that's quite interesting. So, but I think when you're not necessarily trying to build something for an audience or a market with the view to, building a startup, then it's just all the gloves are off at that point. You can just build and experiment. And
I like the. Sorry, I just like
I've
that
stolen
you use
your expression. Yeah.
The expression "the gloves are off,"
Gloves
which just
off.
means nothing.
It means absolutely nothing.
Just,
This is a running joke for us, I think, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess so. Practically, what I would do is, before I even dive into Cursor, I've probably got a rough idea of what it is I want to build. And I will basically chat to Claude off in a separate environment, and any questions that I might have, like, I'll try and stress test the idea. And essentially the aim is to build a roadmap or a PRD that gives us like a kind of a series of steps to go and build this project out. And then we'll decompose that into like basically a series of sequential prompts, and the prompts will go into Cursor to build parts of the product. And like, this is very deliberate, because if I just start with a goal and I pop that into Cursor, as I said, it will just go off and build it the way it sees fit. But if I do it this way, where we've got like a really structured approach, I'll take the markdown of that PRD and I'll pop it in Cursor as well, so it can kind of review that and return to it as a guide as well.
Yeah.
And then, it just seems like a more thoroughly planned out build at that point. And so that's kind of what I've been doing.
So when you work with Claude, then, like, I presume this isn't just like one massive conversation, because I know like, it gets so confused like the longer you go on. Like, how are you doing that backwards and forwards?
I mean, I just set it up as a project, and when I've had a conversation for a particular piece of the build, like, to be honest, the first conversation does tend to be a bit long and messy, because it's essentially just ideation. And it's a bit like having a technical co-founder that you might bounce an idea around and try and work out, okay, what's the preferred architecture that we should employ here, and like, what are the things we should look out for, and what are the holes in my thinking. And that's kind of a very messy conversation, but I'll often take a summary of that and then pop it into the project memory so that Claude can refer back to it. And then, having a project set up is just way easier, I think.
Yeah. So do you keep, so in a project, obviously you've got like custom system prompts plus documentation that you associate with that.
Exactly.
So do you keep, like, say you plan out a PRD, do you then keep that PRD in the project in the project folder, and then that keeps getting updated?
Yes.
And so you would manually just like refresh.
I just have to I just update the file. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that makes sense. I can see why that would help as well with the project structure, because it is quite annoying to keep resetting the context. Like every time you start a conversation, like it's.
I think the other thing that I'll do in Cursor a lot is actually just like I'll switch down the model to Sonnet 3.5 when I'm just trying to like finesse a particular feature or make a very specific change. I find that's very good at doing that. Whereas like when I'm starting out and I've got more of a blank canvas, it's good having Sonnet 4 because it'll populate a little bit more fluidly, and then I'll go, okay, that's not quite what I expected. Let me just hone in on like, a particular feature, but I'll drop the model down to 3.5 and then just refine that, make sure it works, and then move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I won't involve Claude as the kind of standalone. I'll just kind of push forward with Cursor, and then but what I will do is I'll take that, the kind of process summary that Cursor will give you once it's done something, and I'll pop that back into Claude, so it's got some context of the things that we've been doing.
Yeah.
It's almost just like a running record of everything we've been up to.
Yeah.
It's kind of not dissimilar to how you might work with a team of people. And I think that's kind of maybe the key. It's like, don't try to speed run it too much. I think if you're a very good developer, then maybe you might just be like, okay, I kind of have a pretty good idea what's in here. I'm just going to let it do its own thing.
But I mean, there's definitely an issue, which is that like you can assign it code and you can let it go. And like, but even if it's making like one or two changes, like or a couple of files, or even one file, like it does it so quick, you literally can't see what it's doing. It'll like, you see it right, you write the changes, and then the file's updated, and you're just like, I don't know what you did there. So unless it like produces a diff that you can look at every time, it's hard to keep track and keep tabs on it. So the way, the way I've been. Just to maybe tie it back to like where we started. Like I think one of the interesting thing here is we've got you as like a new to coding has now developed a skill whereby you can manage a team of coders. Like and it just happens to be that team of coders is no longer a team of people; it's a team of AI agents, and therefore you found a way to control this that you're happy with, that you can make slow and steady progress towards a goal. Yeah, and that's going to unlock all sorts of different things for you personally. And like I've had very similar. I think it's worth dwelling on the tools a little bit, because again, this is one area where people keep asking is like, oh, but what tools are you doing? Like, how are you doing it? How are you organizing it? It's like, okay, that's practical. I guess we should say some of that stuff. For me, it's the principles that I follow are almost exactly the same. And a lot of this was like what I was developing with Stackwork previously around the Hive process, which was like, what does product management look like in a world of AI? Like it is a different world. There are different challenges. Like, what does it look like? How should we organize it? Is it an agile model? Is it a waterfall model? Is it something new? And that was the concept of Hive. It was kind of like, well, what is that process? And I think the best description or like throwaway sentence that I've got for it is it's like super fast waterfall, which is a lot of waterfall was about thinking up front and defining the problem and the statement and the design so that it was then easier to implement, because it was very expensive to implement and then test. Agile was all about saying, look, it's so easy to implement and test this stuff that we don't need to do that anymore. It's probably quicker to just build it and then see what you're doing. And you would kind of think that natively that's where it would go with AIs. But I think maybe this is like a temporal thing, but I think right now the AIs are brilliant if you give them like a structured framework of what to build, similar to going through a waterfall process. And they're so fast at going through that process that you can do like the full design, think through, development cycle to test in minutes.
Yeah.
And so it's worth doing the upfront work to get a good result out of them. Whereas I would say the vibe coding approach is more the agile, like just if you don't care about the quality so much, then just let it go and don't worry about it. But you might find it hard to maintain. You might have to throw it all away later, but it's fine. But if you step back slightly and put in planning effort, and this planning effort can also be, as you like talked about here, right? Like you can also use AI tools to make your planning better, like the deep research mode in OpenAI. And I tried it out yesterday. So Claude have just released one as well in their paid product. I don't know if it's available to everybody or not.
It is, yeah. I haven't tried it though.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it works. Like it works pretty good. I had it designing me some timber wood doors yesterday.
Nice.
But we'll get onto DIY projects later. It was. Yeah, it's amazing, like going away and doing a lot of the prep work for you to give you something that you can then edit into what you want, sort of thing. Like these are great tools. So you can use tools like this to accelerate your own design to get through this waterfall process in a very quick, almost quite agile way. It's just like saying, but it is worth putting the time in to design the thing prior to then letting the code get written. And then the controls that I wrap around that are very similar to what I would do in a team, right? Which is that I don't need to see every line of code that a developer writes as they're writing it. Like what I'm interested in is like keep writing this until it works. So as in until the unit test has passed or you meet the specification that I've set out. Make sure that's there, and then provide me that particular code change as like a PR and a diff that I can then check in an environment. And so like whilst I can't keep up with an AI agent that writes some code, realizes it's made a mistake, writes it again, the unit test there passed, right, okay, now I'm done. And now I've got something that I can do. If that results in a single PR at the end of it, then I don't need to see all of those iterations. I can just look at the patch file and say, okay, I see. I see what you've done here. That makes sense. All right, I can merge that back into the base. So really, I'm just going through like controlled feature branches, lots of iteration that just runs. But because it's not on main branch, I don't really care too much about whether it works or not. And you can, like at some point I'd like to experiment with having like multiple versions of this run in parallel and then just choosing the one that gives me the best result as I go. I think this is like where Pablo's going with his 10x tools and various things, but like I'm just really curious to see what he releases, but I don't know enough yet to talk about it.
But all of this stuff happens in natural language. You're literally doing this in English. I think that's the key, right? I mean, the thing I've been really conscious of here is like not abdicating my thoughts, the way I think to AI, you know, like that, I think it's really easy to just like set a direction, just let it go off and do its own thing. But I feel like it has to be more of an extension of my own hands. It's a tool.
I think you've got to be a bit selfish, right? Because it's like, I can do that, but then I don't learn.
Exactly.
And like, it's better if I'm like 20% better at telling it what to do, then I'm going to get a better result. So I may as well learn as I go along.
Oh, completely.
Like, I mean, I wouldn't say I don't stick necessarily to the natural language. Like I will, like the bits that I would care about are going to be like the object definitions in the data. So like what's the data? How is it structured? How does it move in between these different things? Now I won't take the time to make sure that I'm addressing everything at exactly the right level and checking all my syntax. But I was like, look, I want this object and I want this object. And like, these are the bits that are getting passed around, and this is your interface from here to here. And then that just makes it nice and like loosely coupled, so it's easier to make a change over here without breaking something over here and having those tests in place. So I'm pretty happy with the sort of except for where I just make decisions. I'm like, you know what, I think I've done this wrong. Start again. I feel like I'm constantly like prototyping stuff and starting it again. But it's so quick. That
but you learn lessons every time.
Yeah. So what's the positive here then? Like maybe we get into that because that's
Well, what I would say is, just before I do, just to round out that last point, what I found myself doing really early on when I first got into this was just letting the agent go off and write code for a couple of minutes, you know, and I'm not paying attention to what it's doing. and I would fill that time doing something else, because we're human, right?
Yep.
I'm not just going to sit and watch. So I'll open another browser and I'll have Twitter going and I'll be like seeing what someone's written, and then I'll come back to it and be like, all right, cool, it's asking me for something. Like, let me come back to it and check in, and and that is more like vibe coding.
Yeah.
And then I realized, like, oh, actually, this is a discipline, right?
Yeah.
You need to sit and focus with this thing. Like, if the intention here is for me to learn, but also ultimately to build tools that serve me, then yeah, I need to be intentional about it, and I can use this as this is permissionless learning, which we talked about in a previous episode. So it was almost like you're doing a bit of context switching there as well. You're like, okay, it's doing its own thing. Let me just go off and do something else. And
I've literally had it coding in the back of the van with the Starlink on whilst I was driving places. Like I do, like that happens quite regularly. It's like, oh, I'll just set this off.
Yeah.
Like give it some guardrails. And again, because I've got those controls around, like, look, you can do whatever you want on this branch. Like, you can't fuck anything up, and I'm only going to let it in if it meets the requirements that I've set out, and I can understand the code at the end of it. And it's, But
that's the key, right? Because you don't want to just abdicate everything to the agent.
Yeah.
And so for me, being able to interrogate the code that it's written, like, I don't have the experience to sit back and go, okay, that code should not be written in that way. So I'll use agents to figure that out for me, and I'll go, right, review this now, tell me what is actually happening, why is it written this way, is this optimal? And sometimes Claude will come back and go, this is really well written, this is exactly what it needs to be. And then other times it will come back and be like, it maybe should be doing X, Y, Z. And then I can take that as a prompt. So I'll get Claude to give me a prompt for how to improve it in Cursor, and I'll feed that back to the agent in Cursor. And I just find that process to be really good. Like, I'm at the center of that still.
Yeah.
But I'm doing that deliberately to learn.
I think I think the difference is that you're trying to learn.
Yeah.
You're not necessarily trying to like build with the highest velocity. Like, I've been quite interested in, like, how do you do this? Like, how do you replace like a development team like this, and is it even feasible? Like, and I really do think we're basically there at a low level, and then it's like, I don't see why it wouldn't get better, and I don't see why we're not going to get better context for the LLMs. Like, that's something I think we could probably talk about with our guest next week if he comes on. I think it would be cool.
But yeah, I think, like, in terms of
for learning, you need to be like, the point is the learning, right? Like, if you just
it's also
watch
fun.
it's not learning.
It's also, like, I think what you want when you're learning as well is like feedback loops that demonstrate progress, like that you're making progress. And I think that is like such a big unlock for me as well. Like, on the week, like, I mean, my problem is, like, I'll have so many harebrained ideas and I'm like, cool, let me try building this and let me try building that, and I get distracted, and it's like, that's almost the biggest risk for me. But it doesn't matter for me because, as I said, I'm not actually trying to publish any of this stuff. It's just a learning exercise. Like, on the weekend, I just got completely sidetracked because I was like, oh, I wonder how hard it is to build a kind of a platformer game where I can just like insert a character sprite that looks like me. Because I just thought, how cool would it be to put myself into like a Mario style like platformer game where I can jump around and harvest sats and avoid little enemy sprites that look like Janet Yellen. So that's what I did, and I was like, this is kind of cool. It really didn't take that long to build out, and it was just so rewarding because you can just see the result and you can play it, and it's kind of fun, and you're like, oh wow, I just did that in a couple of hours. And that's like a whole different like area of architecture as well that I probably wouldn't have come across natively either. So,
and it's so much easier to learn it by doing it, right? And
exactly.
You have like, it almost doesn't matter like what the project is, what the idea is, what the pain point is that you've got. If there's like a thing that you would like to see built, and then you build it, you will learn so much more than if you just like try and learn some of these concepts in the abstract. Like, because you'll build, like, I mean, I was saying this when we're grabbing coffee, right? There's times I go, I'm fairly certain I've built this wrong, and then I will take myself out of the IDE into like some other environment with the LLMs where I can talk about what I was doing, so I can get almost unbiased opinions about like, well, how would you build this sort of stuff? Would you do
Yeah.
it like this? Would you do it like this? Does this exist? Is there a thing where I can make it do something like this? And it goes, oh yeah, that's called this. And you're like, all right, I didn't know that was a thing. So I never prompted it to do that, therefore it never did. So, and then you go, all right, well, next time I build this, I'll just build it better with this concept in mind, sort of thing. And that makes sense. But what you said a minute ago was around harebrained ideas. And I think this is like, I always think this is the guts of most of the positives. Not that we have more harebrained ideas, but it feels like the ability to test ideas and to start new things and to deliver like productive businesses, products, services, whatever it is just dropped massively with this. Like the main thing we do as humans is use intelligence, and we're saying like, there's a what seems like a big doomery like negative here, which is that we've just commoditized intelligence. So everybody's going to have access to build it, right? To use it and to build it into their processes and potentially replace people in seats that have previously done those jobs. And that sounds like super scary. But the flip side of that is that you are also a person that can use this and can build whatever it is that you desire and that you want, or any ideas that you've had. Like the cost of you like having agency and taking action in the world has just dropped precipitously. And that is in general good for society.
Yes.
You know, the cheaper we make it to make things, to, you know, improve our lives, improve like, you know, build capital goods, build new product services, like we make life better for everybody on the whole, and we make everything cheaper. It's just that potentially the job you used to have might not exist anymore, but the job that you could have, that you most want, that most, you know, like meets your expression, like what you see and want in the world, like you can go and do that, and you can go and do that now at a much lower cost than you could have done it previously. So it's not easy, but like I think that's the major positive, is that, you know, you like, so to go back to the example we were just talking about, right? Like you didn't know how to code these things previously. You've always been interested, you've always worked in tech, you've always had technology teams, but you always needed somebody else, right? Like you would always go and get a technical co-founder, you would always go and hire developers, and it just makes the cost of experimentation so high. Because all of a sudden, like your harebrained scheme to test it out might cost you 25 grand.
That's right.
Something is like, oh, that's a hit.
Well, there's also an opportunity cost.
Yeah.
Because, you know, what else could you be doing with that time? You can only fire off so many arrows when you're experimenting as well. If they all take 6 months to a year to test out properly as well, you know, that's the other side of it. So, I mean, if you think about like what this looked like, I don't know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you know, as I said, you need the team. You need the technical co-founder, especially if you were non-technical. You need money, so you'd go to investors, you'd try to pitch them on your idea, you'd hopefully have some sort of working prototype, and if it was already, you know, if it already had customers, then all the better, but then you'd need to get an office. You'd have to staff that with a bunch of people as well, build out the team. I don't know, you know, like you personal runway, you'd want some cash in the bank because again, you've got that opportunity cost problem.
Yep.
I mean, it does just feel like this is a bit of a golden age for entrepreneurship. We've kind of talked about this before a little bit, but yeah, now I think my personal approach is to not think so much about building for markets. Don't think about the size of the opportunity, and don't think about, you know, trying to focus group out your idea and think about what features everyone else wants. Just build for an audience of one, which is you. That's what I'm doing. I kind of feel like if I can build tools that are valuable, that give me leverage, then there are going to be similar people out there like me that would also benefit from it, but only if I'm getting a benefit from it. So I kind of feel like this is kind of maybe the 180 of most startup advice that's come out in the last like couple of decades. But you know,
it kind of becomes, if you think about it, right? Like it's the return on invested capital like profile is different here because the invested capital is so much less. The return doesn't need to be as big. So, you know, if it's a startup world and you're raising $21 million, you need to think like what's the the business that underpins, and like what's the exit that people are looking for, and like how do you scale it up to that level, then you really do need a very large audience of people that are buying your product to do it. And therefore that's why you would do focus groups and you would build for like general needs that people have. Whereas if your invested capital is 6 months of your own time, then you can price whatever value you want on that, but it's a lot less generally than $21 million, depending on who you are.
6 months of your own time while you're also testing out, a dozen other things.
And you're learning and you're having fun and you're, there's high momentum, good energy. Like this is just
like you were all in on one idea for 6 months because you had to be. And now it's like, I can test out
driving.
I can, well, evidently, I haven't tried that yet, but give me time. But yeah, you can be testing out half a dozen concurrently.
Yeah,
and then
my goal is to be able to do stuff while I'm having a walk. It's like I want to be able to go on like a 3-hour walk. And I'll do some of the design work on a walk, but it's like you don't quite get the feedback that you need. You kind of need to stop and look at stuff. So
True.
So I'm on the generally the walk-in desk if need be.
Yeah, this is all like we kind of touched on this yesterday, but this is like Naval's permissionless leverage, right? Where he's talked about like in the past you have these like traditional forms of leverage. Largely, I think it was labor leverage and capital. So labor is like you've got to go and convince a bunch of people to come and work for you on your idea, and that's like essentially the early part of the process where you're building the team, and then the capital leverage is you need to go and get the money from investors in order to build. And the permissionless leverage in the past has been it's like code and media and products that you can build once and they have like relatively low costs of replication. And I think this is like the big unlock for AI. If you're remotely entrepreneurial, you just have ideas that you want to test. The barrier has just dropped even further. Like it's always been permissionless if you think about it to some degree. It's just those barriers and the opportunity cost has always been there. And I just think those have collapsed, and that is incredible. Cool. I mean, for me, it's so energizing because I can have an idea in the morning when I'm in the shower. I can walk out and just start like planning it out with Claude, and I'll just be like, hey, is this the worst idea in the world? And the first time it responds to me, it'll be like, no, this is a wonderful idea. And I'm like, okay, hang on. Like, I want you to think through it. You don't have to appease me. And then it'll come back with a few different ideas. And, eventually there's this, like, it'll take the stream of consciousness and will turn it into a plan. And I just think that is, radically permissionless. Like, you can literally get to a working prototype of something in hours.
Yeah, and again, like that just plays into this idea that you can make new things that people are going to want. I was thinking about, like, as you said, we talked about that a little bit yesterday in what was the finest podcast that
of all time
ever been made. And obviously this one's just a tribute, but it did, like, I was thinking about it. I thought, well, because a lot of what he says is about big, like, right? Like, it's like you've got all this leverage, so you can do something and you can make it big, and you can have this data center is basically an army of robots that you can instruct through code and stuff, and it's about you get so much access. And like I feel like there's been maybe a constraint on supply of people that could take advantage of that. And therefore what you got was like a narrowing down into some people could do it and got very big, and other people couldn't do it and couldn't compete. And I think what you're about to do is you're going to have it's going to become very cheap and easy and accessible for other people to take advantage of this. So you can take advantage of it by becoming much better at your media. You can take advantage, become much better at coding, and we're going to see a massive supply in the people that have access to this permissionless leverage.
Yes.
And therefore, I think it's going to move away from. It's not that because you've got this leverage you get to be big. I think it's going to become, because you've got this leverage, like the bit that remains is that it's cheap and you can execute on stuff quickly for yourself.
Yeah.
And then the sort of payoff model for that is not that you then dominate the world. It's that it's going to be more in line with like a kind of Kevin Kelly 1,000 True Fans.
Yep.
Yeah. And as you said, like then it kind of changes like your personal model for like what would you want to focus on? Like, do I want to focus on using this permissionless leverage to build the biggest thing for the biggest audience that I possibly could because I can? Or do I focus on building something that I really want for me, knowing that I now have these tools, permissionless leverage tools to create the media, to create the output, to create the code that I need to then engage with those 1 to 10,000 people that might really, really appreciate this exactly how I've done it, as opposed to the next version. Because I think you'll see like way more stuff come into the market.
That's true.
Way more competition, which is really the guts of the value trap.
That's right. I think the other way we denigrate this sometimes is we just assume that it's all just going to be AI slop, right? Like that is, I think what's interesting about democratizing this is you're going to get people who otherwise wouldn't have built something in the past entering spaces, and they have, what I would have said in the past is like unique domain expertise, but now I would say it's just collective experience or wisdom in a certain area. And you don't necessarily need the, for example, let's just say you've got a teacher has worked for 25 years in the classroom. They've essentially got their own methodology, and they, shoot the lights out. Their kids have like really high rates of learning, or however.
Gloves are off.
Yeah, gloves are off.
Well, maybe that applies to boxing. Because if you took the gloves off, like that would be, that's different. So maybe it is a saying.
Yeah. I think it is a saying. I think we just use it out of context all the time.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? So let's just say there's a teacher, they've got like this collective experience, their own teaching methodology that is maybe a hybrid of a bunch of different others. In the past, if someone wanted to build an ed tech, they're probably a bunch of programmers that, everyone's got an opinion on education.
Yeah, you have like an education advice.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying the known that you obviously you built an ed tech.
Yeah. And I was neither a teacher nor a developer. There you go.
Take that world.
But you'd be still dependent on the technical co-founder there.
Yeah.
How well can you communicate this unique methodology that you've got that is delivering results for 30 kids every year, and go and take that, build something out that essentially can go and help.
It's probably
millions.
more innate than prescribed at this point. Like a lot of the people that do this stuff well kind of do it well because it's how they do it, more than have necessarily sat back and gone, why do I do this?
Yeah.
That's a bit rare.
That's right.
Yeah.
But on the size thing, I think that's like, that's something we talked about yesterday as well. I can't quite remember the exact quote. I think I was telling you, like I was listening to a podcast maybe last week from the two founders of Andreessen Horowitz. And like one of them made this comment, they were talking about like the founding of the firm.
Like as in it was Andreessen or Horowitz?
One or the other.
Yeah, okay.
They're both very similar looking, and I can't quite remember who said this, but they were essentially trying to make this point that like when they were talking about the founding of Andreessen Horowitz, that they were essentially stating that it was just as hard to start like a small boutique thing that kind of, as they said, means nothing in the world, which I kind of immediately took issue with. And then build that, in like, or build something that's going to be this like, I think they called it a world dominating monster. So it's like essentially the same amount of work. So you may as well do the latter. And I just fundamentally think it's bullshit. I mean, and I've tried both I've done both, like I've built small businesses.
You built a world-beating monster.
I haven't done that.
I tried.
But also, I don't really care to, which is the other thing. I think there's like this embedded premise here that like somehow small equals meaningless. And I think that is just bullshit as well. Like the only people here this really serves is venture capitalists. This is like a classic case of Munger's like, show me the incentive and I'll show you the outcome. This is like them talking their book.
Oh yeah.
But I think it's just bullshit because like they conflate scale with significance, and I just don't think that really matters. And this is where I think this golden age is like really appealing, because it's like you don't need to go and build this like multi-billion-dollar company for it to be really valuable. It's going to be valuable to the people who find it valuable. But because we've just collapsed all of the costs of going and starting this, it doesn't matter. You don't need the venture returns anymore. You don't need to signal all of the kind of the growth narrative. Like you don't need to go and hire hundreds of people, which I always kind of found a bit ironic in big tech. It's like the technology is meant to be deflationary, and so what we're going to do is we're going to go and hire like tens of thousands of people to push this product out to enterprises that also have tens of thousands of people. But like really that's also just signaling growth, and then that helps VCs to go, hey look, our portfolio company is growing, and then they can go and raise another fund. And I don't see this like what the value of like scale and significance needs to be here. Like you can certainly build a bunch of small things that just work really well. There's a guy on Twitter, I've forgotten his name, who's got his portfolio of small bets. And I've always really loved that idea. I've forgotten his name, he's like ex-Amazon, I think. And yeah, so anyway, I saw that podcast and I was just like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? Maybe it was true in the early 2000s, but I just don't think it is.
Yeah. So I think what we're saying then is that there's a massive unlock here with AI, that we drop the cost of experimentation and starting businesses and things that you love. So this is the flip side of AI is a productivity marvel, and therefore for owners of businesses it's great because they can reduce their costs. Unfortunately, reducing costs tends to mean that people lose jobs, but the great side of that is that it's never been easier than it ever has been before to learn skills and start businesses. And so the outcome of which would be more productive business inside society with more people doing more things. And then I guess if you took like a kind of Austrian economics sort of view of this, you would say, well, human wants and needs are infinite. Like we don't necessarily know what we're missing at the moment, but we always seem to find something that's not inherently perfect and then desire that thing over what we've got now, in the way that, like, I'm sure if Henry VIII could come to the modern world and just be like a random pleb, you'd be like, oh my god, you've got one of these like mechanical things that can take you everywhere, and like I have like indoor plumbing, and I've got food on demand from anywhere in the world, and I have all these things, and I can watch like anything, and I've got a magic box I can talk about. They just be like, this is amazing, and I don't think we've ever had it so good. I think there'll be just more human desires in the future, but then to do those things requires people to be putting in time and effort, identifying the needs, and then building out the needs. And I think the bit that humans seem, it's almost like the last thing that remains to me is that humans are the ones that experience the thing, not the AI. The AI is is very much a doing component, and it can do stuff like test ideas and then like read feedback and data and things like this. It's not that it couldn't take action in the world, but as far as I'm aware, it kind of doesn't have this qualia. Like there's not a thing to be what it means to be an AI. Like a bow.
Well,
in the famous essay.
Can't live your life for you.
Yeah. And so maybe the thing that humans do is that they are like the spear tip that experiences the world, the physical world that we're in, and then figures out, all right, well, how would I improve my current lot? And like there's an end goal here where humans become the experiencers, like the conscious experiencers and observers of what the AI builds. Yeah. And then you lead those things. But what that would look like is, in the early stage, particularly, and maybe in the later stage, is a bunch of people figuring out things that can be improved, and then improving them by forming, companies, organizations, different processes to improve on that thing, and then trading amongst themselves so they could figure out who does it best. Like, right. So we'd have lots of companies.
I feel like, yes, I feel like there's like two really interesting branches we could travel down now.
We should talk like briefly at some point about the builder AI thing.
Okay.
Like, that was funny.
I feel like you've kind of touched on like two interesting divergent pathways we could go down here, and we should go down both. I think one is like this kind of world of abundance, and then the other is like almost describing like a bit of a like rerun of the Renaissance here potentially. But like just to round out the business building, like I think the other side of this permissionless leverage piece is that, okay, you could build small businesses, which is great, and I think for us personally that was part of the mission when we've started. It's still part of the mission. We want to see more durable small business in our community, in our local community. So I think there's maybe a bit of a barrier here mentally as well for a lot of people to not get started because they feel like if they're going to build something, it has to be big. And I would just say, like, just rethink that a little bit. Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be a world-beating startup where you're going out and raising $21 million to go and build the thing, So I think that's part of where the permissionless leverage bit kicks in for me. And then the other side of that is, if you do want to build something that's really big, I just think it's gotten so much easier to do that. And we've got plenty of examples of companies now that if you just look at their user acquisition rates, like, you know, it's just insane how quickly they're able to harvest up new users relative to, you know, companies from 10 years ago.
And bear in mind, like, big things start small.
That's right.
So it's same start point anyway.
Well, I think the motivation is personal. Like, it's probably, like, for me, the motivation isn't necessarily to go and become a multi-billionaire. So that's my animus. It's probably wrong for me to project that animus onto other people. If you want to build something with the view to going and becoming a multi-billionaire, that's on you, that's fine. I'm not here to tell you that that's wrong. I'm just suggesting that either way, I think the barriers to starting are just so low now. And yeah, if you are intentional about it, you can just do things. So I
would say that any of the billionaires I have met seem like that's more of a burden.
Yeah.
Than a boon.
I mean, yeah, my sentiment exactly, but yeah, each to their own. But I think, like, yeah, you touched on the world of abundance bit, which I think was interesting because it's something that we'd commented on following, like, the All In podcast from the weekend, because I think this is kind of the view that Friedberg took in the pod, which was quite interesting. And yeah, I mean, I think the parallel there is to, like, the Industrial Revolution. You know, prior to the Industrial Revolution, like, goods were, you know, relatively scarce. They were artisanal, and so therefore were, like, obviously quite expensive. But then when you could just start mass producing this stuff in a factory, obviously that collapsed the prices of those goods. They were plentiful, and so more and more people could go and own them. And so in that way, you know, you had this big, like, deflationary force. And I think we're seeing that with AI potentially. Although right now it feels like the cost of everything is going up. But yeah, I think that was, like, an interesting dimension as well. And maybe this, like, world of abundance is obviously, like, a big net benefit for everybody. It'd probably be the obvious benefit, I think, if it plays out, that most people would get to share in.
Yeah, I think the only question that remains, and I know we spent a lot more time on this one yesterday, was just, like, how do you get there personally? And then what does it, you know, what are the risks? Because there is, and I quite like where we're going today. This actually feels like way more positive.
Yeah.
Than yesterday. Well, yesterday was the finest podcast that was ever recorded.
Yep.
This is just a tribute, but I think it's fair to say that, like, this is a productivity marvel potentially.
Yeah.
The way to take advantage of that is to be productive, which means to identify opportunities to make things better, and then leverage these tools to make them better, and to do it in a way where you don't necessarily need to grow a massive business. Like, build it process first, human at the edge, as we keep talking about.
Yes.
And then use the tools. Take a process. It's definitely like the revitalization of, like, Lean Six Sigma principles and stuff like this is going to become hugely important in, like, how we actually design and deliver these products going forwards.
The observation there, I think, that's important is that, like, world of abundance won't just create itself necessarily, because the incumbents won't have any like, incentive to go and drop the prices of goods. They're just going to harvest up the increased margin. This is, like, kind of playing out in the value trap. And so it is incumbent upon people to, maybe incumbent's the wrong word to use there. It's dependent on people starting new businesses. The new entrants will come in. They're going to take advantage of that technology natively from day one. That's where the price will start to drop.
Well, and this was the point of the value trap, right? Like, this is how, the only reason we're so confident about it is because there's quite large financial incentives attached to it, where you go, like, right, there's a big enough financial incentive for somebody to do this, to create the company that then has the massive margin. But in doing that, everybody that was displaced now knows that trick. Like, there's no secret here. It's not like somebody's doing something that's patented that can't be replicated. This can all be replicated. And it can all be there's not necessarily a technical moat, there's no secrets behind it. It's just something that requires people to do stuff. And you become way more motivated, like, in looking at new ways to work and earn a living when you lose your job. Like, if you've got a comfortable job, like, unless you're like me or you and you just, like, you kind of rebel against these things whenever you have them, like, then people will suddenly become motivated to put these things into action, and that's the competition that then chips away at that margin over time. This is why it falls over that 3 to 5 year period, not necessarily in the initial few years when there's just huge opportunities on the table.
Yeah, and do you know what? I think there's like an important point here. This is like us talking our book to some degree, but like, it is important to point out that we are naturally rebelling against that structured working environment because that's just how we are. We've not particularly thrived in them. And so for me to sit there and go, do you know what? There is a better way of doing this is really just me going, yeah, that suits me. And there are a lot of people who I think who naturally benefit from that more structured environment and maybe wouldn't necessarily like to see that disappear. But I guess the point I would make is I think the way we work will change. And who's to say we need to work 40 hours a week to get the same amount of output? Maybe you just fill it with more interesting pursuits, and that's great. Maybe companies demand more of you. Or maybe your role just completely changes, and that's also fine. But I think that's just worth pointing out, is that, you know, we haven't necessarily bought into that as a system that works for us.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I guess it's more in an emotional thriving sort of sense, right? Like I'm sure I could have lived in that world.
Of course,
been kind of reasonably happy and content with what I was doing, and, you know, I was doing pretty well out of it, but I did just feel like I was a massive slave. I didn't like that. So if I was happy with the slavey feeling, then I might have stuck with it. But it was nice to have the money.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I think this is...
And I quote unquote certainty.
Yeah.
Like, I think that certainly doesn't exist, and I think that becomes more and more obvious now. But
yeah. And we kind of touched on that yesterday. There are certain structures that keep you locked into those requirements. I mean, the mortgage is the big one. The 30-year debt instrument is really like challenging because I think it's almost impossible to take like a long-term view on this stuff. You know, generationally, I think the stuff hasn't changed that much. In the past, you could bank on having a career for 30 years at least, and it probably wasn't going to be upended too decisively. Whereas now, I think, you know, locking yourself into a 30-year mortgage is uncomfortable when you don't know what the next 3 to 5 years are going to look like.
I think that's it, right? Like, this is... So, I mean, I've done a few podcasts with various, usually in the Bitcoin space, where I've talked to people and we talked about like the impact of AI, and the bit like when it comes into the like, oh, so it's all positive then, and there's no doomerism, and I'm like, oh no, this is the main risk is a personal risk that people take on, and it's whether you want to lock a very large 30-year long debt in. On the assumption that your salary always goes up, your salary is always there, and the cost of everything keeps going up with inflation. And I don't think that's a wise bet anymore. I think that it was for like the 1980s through to the 2020s. You had a 40-year period where, broadly speaking, interest rates only ever trended down towards zero. Obviously, famously, at the end of like 2020, you went into zero interest, negative interest rate policy in various places around the world. And then in 2021, everything broke. And broadly speaking, again, like interest rates have only ever been going up for the past 4 years. And like they cool off a bit, but the trend seems like it's switched, and we've entered a new secular interest rate period of like interest rates are likely to get higher. Just means the cost of that debt, instead of falling over time, now increases over time. Which means it's even more important for your salary to continually go up over time, or for you to always have a consistent salary. And so this is just places this risk on people when you say like, well, you know, jobs could disappear. Even if jobs don't disappear, it's likely that there's more competition for jobs. Like most of that points to nominally less money in your pocket in terms of salary in a world where like the money that you need to service that debt is likely to go up over a long period. And you could say like, oh well, houses are scarce and therefore they'll go up over time. Well, maybe, but you generally don't take on a mortgage for 30 years in order to flip the house. You do it to live in it. And the moment that you can't service the debt is the moment that you realize that the house was never yours in the first place. You were just borrowing it from the bank and they will just take it back. and then you'll now be bankrupted. And that is the major risk to me, is that I think a lot of people's jobs are designed around, how do I service the debt for the life that I'm living?
Yep.
And it's by taking on all of that debt that is the great undoer.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see this massage from a couple of different directions. Like on one hand, I reckon the banks would probably shift to 40, 50-year mortgages to try and like even this stuff out and get people onto interest-only payments.
50-year mortgage. Think about it.
I know,
you
it's
buy
insane,
a house
right?
at 30 and you're still paying it at 80. Are you not supposed to be retired?
Well, you would think so, but the average age of
Yeah.
mortgage now has gone up. You know, a lot of people who are buying a house, the average age is pushing into the late 40s and 50s. I mean, we're obviously in Australia, so this is maybe a more Australian-centric conversation. And then the other side of that is, if you do start getting that messy transition with a lot of job loss, you know, government has already shown that it's prepared to go and, you know, create programs like JobKeeper to just keep the money flowing. So it wouldn't surprise me if you started to get essentially government subsidized mortgages if it gets really bad. And yeah, man, at that point, you know, like all roads lead to more money printing. I don't know. I feel like these are not good outcomes. And so I for me, it's like I don't necessarily want to be tied to that uncertainty. That feels like the more risky play, to go and dive into property. We don't even have good oversight on what's happening in the next kind of couple of years.
Yeah, if I felt that everybody in the world was well capitalized with money in the bank and could exit their job and spend like with a year's runway that they can then try new things out, I'd be fairly happy that this whole AI transition is only good news.
Yeah.
If most people in the world are like heavily levered in debt and don't have any personal runway, and the idea of like not being paid for a year is just that's
catastrophic.
Catastrophic. Then that's the piece that worries me, and I think I would agree that.
Do you know there's another piece to this as well? That I think it's not even AI technology related. It's what happens when like you get a decent percentage of boomers all looking to downsize around the same time. And I reckon there's probably a point in the next 5 years where that starts, or maybe it's like a little bit longer, I'm not sure. But I reckon there's a point where that just starts to happen all around the same time, where they just start to sell. And because the other thing is like, you probably get to retirement age, you maybe want to take some of that home equity and be able to live off of it a little bit as well. And, you know, and it's like, what kind of effect does that have as well if that all tends to happen around the same time?
Well, the interesting thing is like, if I would say maybe the trigger for that would be something along the lines of bonds, right?
Yeah.
So boomers, boomer, like I'm thinking of like the term for kangaroo there, 6 white boomers. You know the Christmas song, 6 white boomers, snow white boomers. It's in Santa Claus. No, anyway. Yes, all these kangaroos with these houses that they've got. Like are they going to look to downsize? Like you kind of think, oh well, maybe they'll just like live out in their massive house and then just give it to their kids. And what's the difference? But in general, they have saved for retirement. They're only spending money down. Most of them have retired early enough that they've, and potentially with, you know, new technology and whatnot, life goes on longer. You know, they need money and they need it somewhere. And so the house is one thing that they could then shift at some point. I mean, it's true. But the other place they've been encouraged forever to have their money was in bonds.
Yeah.
Right? And like if interest rates just march up, bonds get destroyed on a capital basis as they go. So how do you fill that gap when you've potentially got, you know, this risk of saying like, well, I've got somewhere between 10 and 30 years left to live, and I don't know which one of those it is. It could be 1, it could be 30, it could be more, I don't know. But I don't want to like plan to run down my money to the last second. So where do I do it? And then you go, you know what, I'm sat on this massive house that I don't need anymore because I don't have a family that are here and my kids have got their house. So maybe they give it to the kids and they move into the tiny shoebox that the kids have been able to afford. So they do a swap. But like, it would make sense that they would look to offload that and downsize. if they have that negative pressure. And I think that's the sort of negative pressure you would get from this. And again, if that's in a world where the production of maybe it's better because the production of everything comes cheap. Maybe boomers have just played an absolute blinder.
Yeah.
Like we're just about to reduce the cost of everything to near free, and then they're like, score!
Awesome. Yeah.
Like we just like raped society for 100 years and given nothing and just taken everything. Like I sound bitter there, don't I?
Well, the other is like the I guess the distribution of property owners as well. Like I think in Australia it's about a third of people probably paid off their mortgage, a third roughly have mortgages, and a third are renters essentially. So you know, the third that has paid off their homes probably bought that back in the early 2000s. They're just sitting flush on a lot of home equity. It's the third in the middle, I think, that's the concerning one, where you potentially have this mean reversion of house pricing, but you've still got interest rates that are really high on mortgages that are really large. So your servicing costs are going up, meanwhile your home equity is falling. Like that's the kind of bit that would be like really troubling. The other bit is like in this messy transition, at the risk of like veering back full blown into doomer mode here, but I promise we'll find a way out.
I always think we cover the transition in a different episode.
I think so. Yeah.
It's there's a lot there.
There is like a blue collar, white collar aspect here as well, where I've had this conversation with a few people and they're like, oh, should I just be going and like learning a trade? And the answer is like, maybe, I guess. Like one of the things I think will play out there is like most people default to going, oh no, like automation's coming for trades as well, robotics is coming. And I would almost say in the short term, the risk there is not even robotics. It's a flood of white collar workers who have been displaced, pushing into the trades, at least at entry level, and just like flooding the market with new supply, and that pulls down entry level apprenticeships and people doing apprenticeships for free, and like that's the bit that I think is like of bigger concern in the short to medium term than robotics. But I mean, I think you're right.
In a way, if it's the first thing that comes to mind and it feels like the sort of thing that everybody could do, probably the wrong answer.
That's right.
Right, like going back to the framework of like, humans are the qualia, then it's like, well, like maybe think about like what's unique about you that you can, that not everybody is going to do, or not everybody's going to realize, but would be valuable. And then build the new thing that's valuable, because that probably has, like, at least you can be the person that, if you put that in and you put it in a way where you're not using like tons of people and the costs are as low as they're going to be, and it's just a bunch of AI agents, then it's going to be hard for anybody to outcompete you on that if you can get a market in.
That's it. Yeah.
So I mean, I would generally say go that way.
Yeah.
It reminds me of in Rick Rubin's book, The Creative Act, has been mentioned a few times. I think on this podcast, it's a great book.
Yeah.
Like, and bear in mind, like, this guy's like one of the most successful and pretty like best music producers in the entire world. And one of his like pieces of advice is like, don't listen to the audience. Like, don't even think about them. Like, don't consider them like you're creating something. Just like create it for you until you think it's correct, and then let it out into the world. And do whatever you want with that. And it kind of reminds me of this like concept of the people as the experiencers, and the finding the thing to do is like, don't, like, that is something that is more uniquely human, I think.
Yeah.
For now.
I think like the real question that comes up here is, why do we choose to work on the things that we do? And it seems to me like some of this should just be subjective. This is channeling your own inner drive, solving for your audience of one. And it seems to me that the way to enjoy your work is just to work on something you enjoy. And I think that's still going to serve you in the future, even with AI. It's just going to be a bit easier.
Yeah.
And permissionless leverage is the enabling function.
Yeah.
That will allow you to do that.
Yeah, and some of the best things in the world are not done, because we're talking a lot about commercial things, right? Like, I think this is like, it's natural because AI is it's a productivity tool and technology. It's going to make you more productive. Instantly we turn to like, what does it do to jobs, and like, what does it do to people and their ability to earn money, and how should you take advantage of that? And that makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, like most of the stuff in the world that we really value and that we consider like to be truly beautiful or something that's worthwhile is not necessarily something that was done for commercial purposes.
Yeah.
And often it's when you take the commercial out of it and you do something that you actually produce something that's worth keeping around, like in posterity. So
All the commercial stuff
maybe-
tends to follow.
Well, it may or it's just not commercial at all, right?
Yeah.
And then, but it's like a gift to society. It's
Yeah.
like all of these things. Like to do any of that, you need time and you need space. Like you need the concept of leisure, right? Like you need the space to consider things and what you want to build in order to have that impact. And then you only get that when you start to remove the other aspects that you need from your life. So if you can eat cheap and live cheap and do stuff, and whether that's done because there's so much abundance in the world or you've taken those choices yourself up front, then I think that's the way
Completely.
to do it. But I think on the whole, like AI is positive in this sense because it allows us to do those things.
Exactly.
It will allow you to make choices yourself that can remove you from this like your debt system, from like your ability to be forced to work, well not forced, to work a particular job. You can work in different ways. You have so much more optionality than you ever had before in your life. You can learn new skills. Like I think I think that's the positive of the thing.
Yeah.
It's about your ability to create, be that in terms of like arts, businesses, whatever.
Yeah, in that respect, it is like the Renaissance, right? And that age of economic abundance frees us to go and pursue those things that we really want to, in a similar way that patronage did during the Renaissance. It's just that at that time, I think they were rediscovering classical knowledge, whereas now we can, I think we can.
I think we're
broaden our
probably also
horizons,
just recording, rediscovering
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
classical knowledge in a way that you can just do this.
You can just do it.
We're realizing that, like, you can just like be a gentleman scholar.
Yeah.
Like you
And
don't have to be.
This ties in nicely to last week's episode, The Rise of the Generalist, because this is the universal person to some degree. This is the Da Vinci approach. You can just go and build knowledge in a bunch of different disciplines and see where that takes you.
Yeah. So your job is to experience life and to realize where the sharp edges are, and then to improve them for everybody else.
Yeah.
And if you do that, you'll probably do very well. And if you are doing that, these are excellent tools to help you do it.
I think that's a pretty good place to
I
wrap.
quite like that. I mean, this is just a tribute, but I think that was good.
It was
I think maybe
pretty good. Yeah.
All right.
I think we wrapped there.
Okay.
Cool.
That's the good stuff.